Welcome to IVF This, episode 201, IVF and Asynchronous Grief.
Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go.
Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing so well today. If I sound a little bit different, I have been battling my asthma and allergies and colds. So same Emily, moderately different voice, I guess. But if I sound different, that's why. Everything's good. Just getting better from all the allergies and colds and, of course, my spicy lungs. All right, today we're going to be talking about something that, because of what I talk about, grief and things like that, I actually see it in a lot of different areas, but specifically to infertility, IVF, miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and relationships. But most people don't have the language for it. And when we don't have the language for something, we often create stories about it and around it. We personalize it, we judge ourselves, we judge other people. We make pain mean something it does not mean. And so today, I wanted to offer you a language that may explain a lot. So today we're talking about asynchronous grief. Now, this is not a formal diagnosis of anything. It's not necessarily like an elegant clinical disorder or anything like that. It's simply a useful framework for what happens when grief is happening on a different timeline, in a different rhythm, or in a different expression than the people or cultural around it expects to be, right? So in simple terms, it's the same loss, but different clocks. And I'm going to talk about the clocks in just a little bit. That will make more sense. And while this absolutely happens between partners, which we will talk about, it also happens between the griever and the world around them. And so those are the two different things that I'll be covering in this episode. And so what that can look like between the griever and the world is it could be between your pain and society's expectations, between your heartbreak and other people's attention span, between what you lost and what culture thinks, quote unquote, counts as a loss. And that matters because sometimes grieving hurts twice, because once that first pain is the loss itself. And again, what happens when the loss is misunderstood. So let me tell you a little bit of a personal story. I've talked about this in different points of the podcast. So the story may not be like unique, or you may have heard it before, but the way that I want to talk about it really shows up in asynchronous grief. So in the summer of 2020, my husband and I did what we believed to be our final embryo transfer. We were never going to have to do this again. We were going to have, this transfer and be successful, and that would complete our family of 5 that we wanted. And in hindsight, which, off the subject, hindsight can be very rude, but because looking back, I can see how I walked into that transfer with what I would now call like forced arrogance. This is going to work. This is our time. This is happening. And while there's nothing wrong with believing that, for me, at the time, I would have called that confidence, but now I understand it very differently. I understand that it was fear wrapped in hubris, right? So I was trying to outrun vulnerability by pretending certainty. Now, would better emotional preparation have prevented the devastation when it failed? No, absolutely not. It was going to be devastating, full stop, regardless. But what preparation could have done, and what I now teach my clients through tools like failure planning, is it would have helped me locate agency before the rug got pulled out from under me. Instead, the rug got pulled out from under me and I went down hard. Asses over ankles is what my mom would say. So when we got the call, you know the call. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but that one, I was crushed. And in the days, weeks, and months that followed, I moved through grief in a very recognizable way. I would swing between being inconsolable and appearing outwardly fine. I would collapse privately, function publicly, crying 1 hour, making dinner the next hour, right? But my husband did not grieve like this. Outside of the immediate fallout of the call, he really didn't have much outward emotional expression at all. He wasn't crying the way I was. He wasn't talking about it constantly. He wasn't visibly wrecked the way I felt wrecked. And because anger was so like braided into my grief at that time, I made meaning out of that. I made it mean he doesn't care as much as I do. He wanted this less than I did. I'm carrying this all alone. But later, when we went to marriage counseling, which I always encourage, it's a wonderful opportunity for you guys to reconnect and establish boundaries, things like that. I'm a big proponent of marriage counseling, but in these therapy sessions, I started listening to his words instead of the story I had created about him. And what I learned, what I started to recognize changed everything. His grief was not less than mine, it was different. My grief centered around the failed transfer and what that meant for the shape and the look of our family and our future. His grief centered around watching the woman he loved turn herself inside out, chasing something that kept hurting her. He was grieving helplessness. He was grieving watching me grieve. He was grieving not being able to protect me from my grief. I thought he was grieving the transfer less. What I didn't understand at the time and what I do now is that he was grieving me more. And that is asynchronous grief. Same event, different pain, different clocks. But it's not just relational, meaning it's not just the relationship with people that can be asynchronous grief. It is also cultural. And infertility grief lives here constantly because infertility, IVF, miscarriage, pregnancy loss, these experiences are drenched in disenfranchised grief. And if you're interested in that topic, I did a whole podcast episode. You can just go to my show and search disenfranchised grief and you can find it. But disenfranchised grief means grief that is not fully recognized, validated, socially supported, or understood. Imagine you already have grief. And then imagine grieving in a world that does not know you are grieving. That is asynchronous grief too. So, what does it look like? You're grieving embryos. And someone says, well, at least you know you can make embryos. You're grieving a miscarriage. And someone says, at least you know you can get pregnant. You're grieving another failed transfer. Someone says, just stay positive. You are grieving never having the family or the family size that you imagined. Someone says, be grateful for the children that you have. You are grieving infertility trauma during pregnancy. Someone says, but you got what you wanted. You are even grieving years later. Someone silently wondering why you are not over this yet. Do you see it? Your grief is happening in one timeline. Culture is operating on another one. And there's often a social clock. That's what I mean by different clocks. There's a different social clock for grief. Culture tends to believe grief should be visible but not messy, painful but brief, meaningful but convenient, deep but still productive, acknowledged but quickly overcome. And infertility grief obeys none of those rules because infertility grief is repetitive, it's layered, it's invisible, it's cumulative. It is not one loss, it is often death by 1,000 cuts, a failed cycle, a canceled cycle, a miscarriage, a due date that never came. another baby shower, another calendar year, another bill, another body betrayal, another waiting room. And yet, because there's typically not one singular event that culture gathers around, people underestimate the type of grief we experience entirely. And this is why a lot of us end up feeling crazy. We're not crazy. We are grieving something real in a world that often, typically, minimizes invisible loss. We are hurting in a timeline that does not match the people around us. And we are carrying pain that other people cannot see. And I got to tell you, this happens to us internally too. Like sometimes asynchronous grief is between you and you. Part of you wants to move on, part of you cannot. Part of you feels relief that treatment is over, and part of you feels completely devastated. Part of you is grateful, part of you is furious, part of you is healing, part of you is still back there. And that's normal too. Humans are not linear creatures. So, what do we do with all of this? So, first step is we got to name it. Sometimes simply saying something like, my grief is real, even if it's out of sync with the people around me. That can be powerfully regulating, just acknowledging what's happening for you and why it looks different external to you, right? Just naming it often takes a lot of the power away from it. Step number 2 is we're going to stop using external recognition as a proof of legitimacy. Your pain does not become real only when other people understand it. Your grief does not require a witness to be valid. Now, grief and healing does require, in part, a witness, whether that witness is you or someone else around you, a therapist, a coach, something like that. But that doesn't mean that it has to be validated through that. Your grief is valid because that is what you are feeling. And that's all the prerequisites that all the check boxes we need to say, oh, it's valid. You're feeling it? That's valid. That's all we need. And then the third step is let grief be specific. You may not only be grieving a pregnancy, you may also be grieving time, identity, control, money, trust in your body, ease, the imagined version of your family, who you were before this journey. Specific grief tends to soften suffering. It doesn't make it go away, and that's not the goal, but it can soften it. Number 4 is release the clock. There is no morally superior timeline. Quick grief does not equal strength. Long grief does not equal dysfunction. Visible grief does not equal deeper love. Quiet grief does not equal indifference. And finally, number 5, get curious with your people. Instead of, why don't you care? Try, what does this feel like for you? It feels like this for me. What does it feel like for you? What are you grieving right now? And how does grief show up in you and around you? And just asking those questions, just coming from a place of curiosity, is already going to open up a lot more communication than accusations or really leaning into the story that you've told yourself about this person and how they're grieving what you're experiencing. And if no one gets around to this, I want you to hear me clearly. Some of the loneliest grief is grief that has outlived other people's attention span. That does not make your grief excessive, it makes it enduring. If you are still grieving something that others have forgotten, if your loss was never publicly acknowledged, if your timeline embarrasses you, if your pain coexists with gratitude, if you and your partner love each other but are grieving in different dialects, you are not doing grief wrong. You may simply be grieving asynchronously, out of sync. And perhaps the invitation is not to force yourself into someone else's timeline, but to honor the truth of your own. All right, my beautiful friends, that is what I have for you this week. If this episode resonated, send it to someone who may need language for what they're carrying, or maybe they've expressed frustration with their partners or their friends or their caregivers in this way. But send it to them, see if that can help. I hope this helped you. Have a beautiful week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.